Welcome to the Women's History Program for March, A Seat at the Table, Women in Science and Research. A few housekeeping items before we get started. All participants are placed on mute upon entry. Please utilize the chat function to introduce yourself, name, title, if applicable, how long you've been a NAHSE member, and ask questions. For those joining us for the first time this evening, my name is Carl Marie Memnon, and I'm the president of the National Association of Health Service Executives, New York Regional Chapter. This will be our agenda for the evening. NAHSE is the premier healthcare professional organization for Black healthcare executives. On behalf of the chapter officers, Jay, Abigail, Christine, Max, and Maya, again, welcome. In addition to the 6 elected officers, the board of directors consists of 12 committee chairs. Currently, there are 33 chapters nationally. The New York Regional Chapter, founded in 1968, is one of the 9 founding chapters. Our committee chairs pictured here are foundational in supporting our chapter's mission and vision. Before we get started for the evening, I would like to thank our 2020 and 2021 institutional members, Health First, Hofstra, MSK, Mount Sinai, Northwell Health, Elmhurst Hospital, and Harlem Hospital. In recognition of Women's History Month, our focus for this evening will be on women in science and research. This topic is critical for all communities, in particular the Black and Brown communities. Having a seat at the table is critical in how ideas are formed and how decisions are being made. The women on the panel are phenomenal and have contributed significantly in the healthcare industry. During this presentation, feel free to ask questions in the chat, which we will answer at the end of the presentation. I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. Laura Riley. Dr. Riley is an obstetrician and gynecologist in chief at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center and Given Foundation Professor and Chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Weill Cornell Medicine. In this role, Dr. Riley leads the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Weill Cornell Medicine. She leads the Alexandra Cohen Hospital for Women and Newborn, the Obstetrics and Gynecology Enterprise at New York Presbyterian, Weill Cornell Medical Center, Weill Cornell Medicine, as well as New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital, New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, and New York Presbyterian Queens. A particular focus of the department is transforming women's health care, beginning with attention to maternal mortality and morbidity. A maternal fetal medicine specialist and internationally recognized expert on obstetrics, infectious disease, Dr. Riley specializes in the treatment of expecting mothers whose pregnancies are high risk because of chronic illness or infectious disease. She works with the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists to develop guidelines for the care of pregnant women with Group B strep, Ebola, Zika, influenza, and COVID-19, as well as maternal immunization. Dr. Riley received her Bachelor's of Arts degree in biology from Harvard University and medical degree from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Dr. Riley remained at the University of Pittsburgh for her residency in obstetrics and gynecology before completing a fellowship in maternal fetal medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and a fellowship in infectious disease at Boston University. With that, we will begin our program.
Sure. So I guess I'm a physician, so it's not it's a pretty straightforward path, at least in the beginning, right? So you go to college, go to med school, do a lot of math and science, and I did that. But I actually was always interested in math and science, so I went to Stuyvesant High School, which is a specialized high school focused on math and sciences. And I think my strategy has always been to do what I like, and I tended to like analytical things. And as I was going through medical school, I think in the back of my mind, I always wanted to be able to have a broad impact. And so infectious diseases was interesting to me. I'm a first generation immigrant, and so I come from a background of understanding the impact of something that was very treatable in terms of a disease, but not having access and seeing the devastation that was associated with that. And so both infectious diseases and epidemiology, for me, sort of brought together a lot of my interests. And so I did my internal medicine, infectious disease training at Columbia and Harlem Hospital, as well as I received an MPH in epidemiology at the School of Public Health at Columbia, and then stayed on for several years to teach and see patients and do some research. And then after, maybe 5 or so years of doing that, I felt that I had an opportunity to transition into pharma. At the time, I was working on HIV as an academic, and this opportunity came to continue to work in HIV, continue to do research, but now sort of from a different perspective. And so I transitioned into pharma and went into drug development. So I was developing and running clinical trials for either new antivirals or looking for new opportunities to use approved antivirals. And more for family reasons, I got an opportunity to come back to New York and work in vaccines. So this then brought me back a little bit to the public health epi space, although pharma my role doesn't use a lot of epi. I felt that vaccines development really could be a space where what I contribute to really would have global impact. Now, this is pre-COVID, obviously. I had no idea that we would be here, but those were the things that inspired me and that I used to shape my path. And it sort of brings together all the things that I like to do. So that's how I got here.
Is actually what you bring up, and I think the other women on the panel are going to say the same, wasn't exactly a straight path, right? So it may have started as college and medical school, but clearly there were other things in the way. So we'll get back to that. Thank you so much for sharing. And so next we'll go to Dr. Delivette Castor.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Riley. My name is Delivette Castor. I am currently on faculty at Columbia University in the Division of Infectious Diseases. And I'll jump ahead and say maybe my big claim to fame is that I was a student when Judy was on faculty. So I count her as my mentor, as one of my many mentors, and there are many, and it's I think another valuable thing that I hope we'll talk about. And my path was always circuitous. I'm an immigrant to the U.S., clearly from the Caribbean. I've never been able to shake my accent, and so I don't listen to recordings because I can't hear myself. And I came to the U.S. I think multiple times. The first time actually was after being displaced by a hurricane, and so I went to. I actually finished high school in New York City, and probably one of the worst high schools in New York at the time, at Erasmus Hall. And I went back to the Caribbean and did my undergraduate education in the Caribbean in biology. And it was very plain. I was always good in math and science. I wish if I had other skills, I probably, frankly, would have ended up somewhere else. but it was the only thing I knew how to do well. And so I literally just walked on a college campus and picked that because I knew how to do it. But always followed my passion and my interest, and was earnest in my interest and desire to be a good scientist. So from early on, I sort of always was on the PhD science route. But it's the Caribbean, so I studied coral reefs and did natural products chemistry. But always was a bit interested in sex, probably much too early in life. And if you know much about corals, they kind of do it themselves. So that's not very interesting. It was good science, but it didn't sort of bring in my interest also about people and places. And so my dean actually diagnosed me as an epidemiologist. And that's how I went into public health. And I did my master's in Alabama, so in Birmingham. And I chose Birmingham because they were at the time one of the few schools that actually did research in the Caribbean. And I was very interested in doing research in the Caribbean population. And then came here to New York and did my PhD in Columbia, at Columbia. And I think it was a good experience because I've gone to like bad public education schools, and state schools and fancy Ivy League schools. And it was a good lesson to just know that circumstances is more than anything what affects who ends up where. It's not skills, capability, knowledge, it's mostly circumstances. And so that's a good life lesson in how I even practice my science and remember that. And then after that, after I finished my PhD, I went on to Rockefeller University, which is where I met Maya. And I did the clinical scholars program there because, I, again, always sort of did the math and science bit, but had a very strong interest in social issues as well. And the Rockefeller University at the time was doing a translational science program. So it was sort of the opportunity to do that. And I was there for a while, a little over 3 years, and then moved on to take a position with USAID, doing mostly global health work, global HIV work, and sort of went back and forth between USAID and the State Department, functioning as an epidemiologist, and then adopted implementation science, which is an emerging field that sort of extends translational research from, I would say, from the bench to the curb. And what I like about it is, I think maybe before all of what happened in COVID, when those of us like Judy, who have been functioning as epidemiologists, would tell people that that's what we are. Sometimes they would think we're talking about the skin, or there was just not a very clear understanding of what epidemiology is. I think COVID has made it a household name. And in fact, everyone in my family now thinks that they're an epidemiologist. So it's become quite common, which is nice. But I would say often that, epidemiology, we focus on the cause. We never believe what we see. So we're constantly looking. It's an observational science. So you never trust your observation. So you're always looking for another explanation. And what I liked about implementation science was that it gave us an opportunity to actually do something for the public. So you figure out what the cause is and then what. And so I have been in the business of practicing implementation science and sort of sit in that space between clinical science and sort of how does it actually get scaled up in populations. And when I did that, I did it mostly looking at HIV prevention services in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia to some extent, but that always intersected with services, particularly for women. I think when we step outside of the US, we remember that this is a very feminine epidemic in the world. And so it brought in a lot of reproductive health, sexual health, and some child health as well as issues around violence and policy. And then eventually I came back to Columbia. And here I am talking to you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll have to go back to some of those things that you brought up. And so without further ado, let's introduce our last speaker, whose name, she knows that I'm going to mess it up. I'm out there and I'm just going to admit it. Dr. Chibuzo Enemchukwu. Did I get it close at least?
Very, very good.
There's just no good excuse. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, I'm so happy and so honored to be here. Thank you for having me. So my name is Chibuzo Enemchukwu, and I am a physician scientist. My clinical training is in internal medicine and infectious diseases, and my research training is in clinical and translational science, with an emphasis on implementation science and health disparities. And I was happy to hear that Delivette has talked about implementation science and kind of gave everyone an idea of what that's all about already. So I am currently senior research scientist at the Hunter Association for Research and Alliance for Research and Translation. That's at Hunter College. That's the University of New York. I'm also a visiting fellow at Rockefeller. And I do some other clinical work on the side. I see patients from time to time on Rikers Island. But I think if someone had told me 7-10 years ago that I would be sitting here with all of you talking about women in science and women in research, I really don't think I would have believed them. and it's not for a lack of faith in my abilities, but it's more so that this really wasn't I guess the game plan for me, coming out of the gate. So I grew up in a small town. I'm in Central Florida. I'm the daughter of Nigerian immigrants. But I always knew that I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to, practice medicine, see patients. So I ended up in college in Durham, North Carolina, where I studied psychology, and I just thought that human behavior and the reason why we do things was something that was just very fascinating to me. While there, I had a professor who was one of my psychology professors and one of 2 or 3 Black professors I had in my entire 4 years at Duke. And I did some work in his lab, and he invited me to take a graduate seminar about minority mental health. And that was my first academic exposure into health disparities. And that, at a young age and early in my training education, that really changed the way that I thought about health and health outcomes, whether that's physical health, mental health, all around. And from there, finishing college, I worked with a group in Chapel Hill at UNC, looking at colon cancer outcomes in African-American families in North Carolina. So I did that for 2 years. And so with all of this, once I got to medical school, once I got to residency, once I got to my infectious disease training, I had a pretty good grasp about health disparities, kind of the root causes, and how they played out. But, I have to say, it wasn't really until late in my infectious disease training that something for me changed, right? And research became something that I thought was not only interesting, but I thought necessary. So I had the opportunity to travel to Malawi for a month to help out with a research study. And while I was there, I had the chance to round on adult and pediatric HIV wards. And what I saw there were, children born with HIV who were suffering and dying from untreated HIV, from preventable infections, from treatable infections. Same thing on the adult ward. And I wasn't naive to the situation in Malawi or other places around the world, but of course that didn't change how I felt, right? It didn't change the feeling of hopelessness, the feeling of helplessness and really devastation. And so when I came back to New York, I returned to the hospital in the Bronx. I returned to my training, and what I realized is that in New York, I was seeing some similarities, right? I was seeing children who are now adults, born with HIV and not doing well, adults who were suffering and dying of preventable infections, treatable opportunistic infections. And so for me, this is when something really changed, because it's, you know, like, this can't be. We're in a resource-rich country, in a resource-rich city, and we still have folks who are unable to access the knowledge, tools, resources, interventions that they need to be healthy and to take care of themselves. And I think a very pivotal observation for me was also that these folks were almost always from communities of color. And so this didn't seem like something that, you know, obviously that was okay. And so from there, so following my ID training, I had the chance, like Delivette, to join the Clinical Scholars Program at Rockefeller, which gave me the time, flexibility, basically the opportunity to ask some more of these questions and to dig in deeper about, you know, how we can actually use science, how we can use data to not just report what's going on around health and health disparities, but to actually do something about it. And that's, you know, where implementation science plays a large role. And so yeah, so that was, you know, for me, a turning point in my career, in my life, really. And my time at Rockefeller and my research training really was the opportunity for me to kind of start and establish a career and a path in research.
Thank you for that. Now that you're like sort of on the stage, can I ask you, what's your current research? Just to give some context, and it may be that there are people on the call who want to ask specifically about it, but I'm just curious.
Absolutely. So my research focuses on really using implementation science to address health disparities around HIV, specifically in minoritized communities. And so what I mean by that is understanding the best ways to get the needed resources, interventions, tools, treatments, whatever it may be, to the communities that need it most. And so currently, the project that I'm working on works in collaboration with the New York City Department of Health and a local community-based organization to develop HIV prevention programming. So HIV education, HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, testing, for women with criminal justice involvement. And the way that we're doing this, the way that this is unfolding is, you know, a big part of my work centers on community engagement. So it's really about going into communities, going to where the people are, and understanding what their needs, their challenges, and what their priorities are. And so we engaged this staff of the CBO, of the community-based organization, as well as their clients, so the justice involved women that they work with, to kind of to understand what they need and what works best for them. And now we're in the stage of working to create and develop programming for that population.
Great. Thank you for just giving us a little capsule. And then Delivette, can you tell us what your current research is?
Sure. I'm all over the place. I think with this year, for anyone who's in health, medicine, research, whatever you did before COVID, you're doing that plus COVID. So has gone our field, and I'm with it. So on the COVID side, I'm involved, you know, as I mentioned, I'm in the Division of Infectious Diseases here at Columbia. So we've sort of been in it from the outset of the the epidemic here in New York City. And it's been just a host of opportunities to apply my skills as an epidemiologist as we're sort of thinking about new testing strategies, developing the protocols for testing, looking at how infection is progressing in individuals, what might be some of the clinical outcomes, reconceptualizing our health data as cohort information to look at, to study those when we have had trials of other investigations, how we might adopt some of our local site level questions within that context, and have in the process also put together a few cohorts, one of healthcare workers, really looking at the experiences of healthcare workers from the onset of the epidemic. And we're looking at both serological attributes of those healthcare workers, immunological attributes, as well as psychosocial wellness and how things have been changing over the course of the epidemic. So we've had that cohort now where this marks our 1 year of enrolling people. We started almost very early from the outset. April of last year, we started enrollment of that cohort. And then on the HIV side, I continue to do work thinking about how we introduce new biomedical HIV prevention into populations. And that resides still mostly outside of the US in sub-Saharan Africa. So outside of the US, so for HIV, it's been a really interesting time from a prevention standpoint because we've had new technologies. And I think like with all things COVID that's moved rapidly, it was interesting that we actually had two products, the same product, but for women and for men that had earlier results in 2020 in the midst of all of this. Like who would have thought if you do HIV prevention that would happen? So we're starting early on to think about how those would be introduced in populations, particularly populations of women in sub-Saharan Africa. And so I'm part of a really large consortium that's doing a lot of the work, and that involves both policy work, really supporting host country governments in developing strategies, utilizing epidemiologic data as well as economic data, and both to really think about how they would introduce the product. The new product that we're looking at is the Dipivirine vaginal ring for HIV prevention. And then shortly after that, we'll also be looking at how we would then introduce another new product called long-acting cabotegravir. And then we already have oral pre-exposure prophylaxis for women. So it's sort of, trying to support countries in how they make those decisions. And then along that pathway, it's a lot of questions. I would say in the global health space, Chibuzu's observation, that things are a lot more similar than they look different. I mean, if I had to put up a slide and I just put up what percent of people with HIV, are on meds, and I just give you numbers across the globe. And I told you, pick America and pick Africa. And I think most people would get it wrong because it doesn't look as different as you would think. And part of that is because part of it is some US funding, because there's been this huge program that I was involved in called the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief that's really pushed a lot of services and programs. But also countries have also been quite capable and adaptable in looking at the information and being really strategic about how they deliver services and recognizing that they're resource limited. So I do some of that. And I think also, some of that experience comes to bear with COVID because, for me from the outset, I thought what we didn't recognize in the US is that we are also functioning in a resource limited environment with this. I mean, it stretched everyone at every level and we just couldn't get it. I can tell you the Dipivirine ring that we're developed and introducing, there's been so much thought about population stratification, market shaping, who will take it, how will they take it? And it's this meager product that's not nearly as effective as the amazing vaccine Judy will wow us with and make all of this moot. And we spend so much time thinking about how will people know? How will they know how good it is? How will they know how good it is compared to the other one? Do they really have a choice? And does it matter? And then how do you really get it to access points where people are gonna be? And even in the midst of this, I think I still all day long, I'm getting calls from family, friends, and so forth, who keep asking about, well, which vaccine should I take? And I'm like, you don't have a choice. You're going to go and you're going to get what they give you. However, it still is important to understand why it doesn't really matter so much. And here's why. And why they don't have that information. Like, how do we make it more readily available that people know how to get it and combat some of the misinformation that's producing some resistance to it? So I think, these are things we sort of preemptively do in HIV outside of the US. There are tons. I mean, I can go on, I'll stop rambling, but, and I'll pass it to Judy because she'll tell us all the answers really.
Exactly. So actually, maybe we can pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about sort of your thoughts on leadership and our role as Black women leaders, as we all are, in our own areas. And so maybe I can ask you, Judy, how important do you think it is to sort of set those goals? In 5 years, I'm going to be here. In 10 years, I'm going to be here. Have you utilized that strategy, pros and cons of that strategy? You're on mute.
So it's a great question, right? And I think I'm a goal-oriented person just by nature. So if there's an end, I will get there, right? That's just who I am. However, I think someone said earlier, it's not a straight line. And certainly my career trajectory wasn't a straight line, but I got somewhere, right? Not sure this is where I'm done, but I certainly, if I check some of the boxes of the things that I like to do, where I think I contribute, what I'm good at, I'm certainly close to where what I wanted to be doing, not necessarily where I should be. I think the 5-year, 10-year thing is somewhat arbitrary. I think people should have goals. I think you have to have an idea of where you would like to end up, right? And then figure out how to get there. Nobody ever very few people get to wherever they're trying to go in the time frame that they set up. So you could have a 5-year plan, pretty much guarantee you it might take you 15 years to get there, right? Because you're going to go like this and up and down and things will change. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with a 5-year, 10-year plan, as long as we are flexible and understanding. I think when we're a little bit younger, things are, particularly if you're trained as a physician and a scientist, a lot of that work is mapped out, right? Like there was no, I think I'll go to med school for 2 years and do 3, like you did college 4 years, med school 4 years, residency. So some of it is.
Let's say your story.
Someone, I can't figure out who it is.
Let's say your story.
No. I think somebody needs to be muted.
But then he shot his other best friend, so I'm like.
Okay. So
he won't kill both of best friends out.
Can you mute your phone if you're not speaking? Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having a multi-year plan or a 5 to 10 year, as long as you have some goals. And then don't feel so, it's not going to be whatever you wrote on paper. And I think that's probably the best advice. Like, don't worry about it too much. Have a general plan. But so I didn't do a 5-10 year plan because honestly, I'd say almost 10 years of it, somebody else told me what it would be, because going to med school, going to residency, I think when I got to my fellowship, that's when I thought, let me do something a little different. So in a way, I think physicians have it a little bit easier because we don't have to make that many decisions until well into the training.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think also we eventually have to make a decision. Eventually the fellowship or fellowships are over. And then we have to do the job thing.
Oh, I didn't answer
Which
your
I think
question.
is really quite.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't answer the first part of the question. I got a little flustered there. So I think the first thing you asked me, which I think is important for this panel, is the importance of Black women in leadership. I think it's critically important, right? So one of the things, given some of what has been going on in the country most recently, I think some of the pluses is that there has been much more visibility for Black and Brown people, right? And one of the things that I'm always amazed by from external forces is that people are surprised when we as Black women show up and show out, right? Because we're not surprised, but everybody else always seems to be, which I always laugh at because, so I think one of the things that I've been thinking about for myself, and I would say for more junior people, is really, I think we tend to sometimes are a little bit quiet about our skill set, or a little quiet about our abilities, or a little bit. And I don't know if it's an age thing lately, but I'm less concerned about that. I show up and let people know, oh, I can do this. I will do it well. And so don't be surprised, right? And I think what has been exciting to see is to be first invited to these types of conversations, but I have actually been impressed and amazed when I get on at the women that I have the opportunity to share the Zoom with, because I'm going to be very honest. I was tired today. I didn't have a particularly great day at work. And I was like, oh, I got another one of these Zooms. And then I got on and I saw the faces, and and just in the conversation that we're having and listening to you all's experiences, it has really invigorated me. And it's like, yeah, like, you're good, because there are women out here doing what we do, Black women. And it just makes me feel happy and proud. And I think we need to be happy and proud for ourselves, right? And I don't know that we do a lot of that. So as a leader in my organization and in my life, I do a lot of mentoring now. I emphasize to everyone, not just Black women, have a level of confidence, because if you're here at the table talking to me, then clearly you're already, you've achieved something, right? Because we're working in the same environment, or we're at the same table having a scientific discussion or whatever. So be proud of that, sit in it, and then continue to do what you can do. And it's taken me decades to get there. But that's what I try to do as a leader.
It's so nice. I totally agree with you. I looked at the names and then I read your bios, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I can do one more Zoom. I need to meet these women. But for me, I'm a lot older than all of you. And, when I think back on sort of when I was just sort of getting it going, there weren't many others of us. And there were days when it was just tiresome to be the only one. So it's just, I think it's just so much even more important, right? That those of us that are in it and have accomplished something, which is more than we usually give ourselves credit for, totally bring more and celebrate everyone. So Delivette, let me ask you a question. Sort of, what do you think the importance of specifically having Black women in leadership in research?
So, as I'll echo Judy's point that it's critical. I think it's critical in medicine, it's critical in medical research, it's critical in all forms of research, and it starts from the inception of the design, and from the question. It starts from the question. And like I said, I'm in a specific discipline where we hold dearly to the idea that everything is confounded. Everything you see is a little bit confused. We're in an observational science. And when we're not in it, then often, like if we see Black-white differences, other people might assume that it's a biological reason, without exploring and thinking about so many of the sociological reasons that produce political reasons, that produce health outcomes that we see. I think, this, the explosion of thinking about social determinants of health, which has become very in vogue to understand the person's environment and all of these things and how they actually do affect our bodies. And I think everyone's feeling it, particularly in this year of stress. I think maybe in another time, the idea that stress really can hurt you was faddish, but I think people feel it this year. So I think it will provoke some sympathy and empathy in a different way. But for us, often I would say, I'm trying to be very linear in my explanation, that often in the space of the research that we do, that's clinical or public health, when we think about people of color, we think of them in the space of community engagement as recruiters, as people who touch the community. Or if you're a person of color and you're in that space, they think that's what you're. I'm like, no, I'm an epidemiologist. My business is to think about the design of the study, and that's a very methodological exercise that involves understanding data, that I'm also born in Black skin and walk this earth in that skin gives me another set of perspectives that I bring to bear in the data and in the way I think about the study, but I am an epidemiologist. And so I think having that perspective and the comfort in your expertise to be able to articulate that comfortably is very important. And it's again, I'm just repeating what Judy said. And I would say that it's funny to hear Judy say that she was ever sort of shy, because I've known Judy for 20 years. And the woman was never shy, but it's her own personal evolution. We all start somewhere and we grow. And I would say when I came in to start my PhD, there had been it was the same thing. We were always in these institutions searching for people of color. And I think particularly in New York, it's a stain. It's a stain and a shame, because many of them are embedded in communities of color. Like, you don't have to look that hard to find bright people. So it's sometimes helpful to have the comfort to have walked different paths in the city and be comfortable to say, I'm here, I made it through your institution. It's great. And I had a good learning process, but there are many other people who can do the very same, because I actually went to a really bad school down the road and I made it out just fine here. So it can happen for others as well. But on the leadership end, not just as a student, but in faculty and being involved in these studies, it's always very important for us to be there. Again, like I said, from the inception, and thinking about how we design the study, how we ask the question, who we get, and how we interpret the information and communicate the information to people.
Yeah, you bring up something that's so incredibly critical. All of the scientific sort of discoveries won't really help society unless people understand their value. And it's hard to understand the value when you don't understand the science. And I think that that's really something that we've seen clearly magnified with COVID, right?
Yeah.
It's been an uphill battle. So I'm going to ask you, she was a sort of leadership type, I feel like a Harvard Business School-y kind of question, but I'm going to ask it because it's on here. So as a leader, what do you believe have been the most important skills to gather along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are many, and I'll start by saying that a lot of those skills I gathered and absorbed from watching my mentors and watching folks who were leaders for me. And some of those skills that I thought that were the most important were, one, making everyone on the team feel and understand that they are an important part of that team and that they are a vital part of the team. They're not just worker bees churning out, data for you and results. Another one is really working to lift up, right, your team members. So really working to cultivate their skills and to really help them shine, right? And so if they shine, you shine, everyone shines. And so I think that's incredibly important, and grooming them to be the next leaders, right? And then part of that grooming is allowing them in their roles to practice and exercise leadership, even though you might be the boss. So I think those things are important. And I think, again, I learned many of those things from my mentors and my leaders, but let's also be real. Leadership skills are also learned skills. Okay, so I will say that the opportunities I've had to attend leadership trainings or seminars, or even, being here and listening to other amazing women leaders, though these are also skills that you can pick up, you can learn, and that you can continue to develop.
Thank you. I would just say one other thing is that it's important to be intentional. There are some absolute skills that just you absolutely have to have, but you also have to have your eyes open to know that you're seeing that work well or not work well. And I think, one thing a mentor of mine said to me like years and years and years ago, I was feeling badly about myself because, I was having trouble seeing patients and raising kids and, pulling it all together, how it is. And I was completely frazzled. And so I felt like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to go to this meeting and not present. And I feel terrible. And, I should be able to have an abstract or something like that. And it was really funny because someone said to me, you got to recognize that you're getting leadership skills in other places that aren't necessarily exactly where you think, right? So managing your daughter's skating team, it may have seemed like you weren't learning anything. I learned a lot that year. I dealt with 25 girls and dragging them to international competition. I learned a lot. I probably learned more in that year than I did in the 10 years before, just churning out patients one after the other. So I do think that we underestimate what we're learning along the way, but I do think also some of that learning is intentional, and some of those courses, as you said, I have to say, I hated sitting through that, tough negotiations, but boy, has that been helpful. That's really what, life turns out to be. So I pivoted already to family life, and that balance. So I think that's always something that people are really interested in. And so my question to you, maybe, Judy, I'm going to turn it over. What were you thinking of, and what was sort of most influential when you were trying to sort of get that balance, or is there such a thing as work-life balance? Just out of curiosity.
I am probably the wrong person to ask that question right now. I could have mustered something together in 2019 to have a great answer to this question on the panel. But okay, so I did not have any work-life balance in 2020. It's a little bit better in 2021. I have always struggled with that. My brain doesn't always shut off. It's either completely off or always going, right? If that makes sense to people. Like when I'm off, I'm off, but then most of the time I'm not. This 2020 was horrendous for obvious reasons, but there was no work-life balance. I literally worked 20 hours a day, literally for months. And I think one of the things that really, aside from we have to figure this out, like the global, we actually have to fix this. And thank God we did, but it wasn't a sure bet. So I have now he's 13. I have a 13-year-old. And my family's supportive. They've always been supportive. I consider myself a pretty high functioning person, but some of the issues with being high functioning is people are always like, yes, you'll figure it out, right? Like you'll always figure it out. We're not worried. But with the not worried is like not so much help because, you know, you just figure it out. But I have to say that in the midst of, you know, the running joke in my household last year was, listen, I'm trying to save the world. So whatever it is that you need to do, please do it on your own. And you know, initially I was very serious, and then it became a running joke in my household. But I coming out of that, I realized that I'm extremely blessed to have a family that's supportive, and actually a child that even at a young age was able to actually see that there were things that he could do independently to allow me to do the work that I was doing. And that's, you know, there are adults who can't do that. So I really, you know, coming out of 2020, even though things can always continue to be busy, I think what I'm trying to do is listen more, which sounds like it should be easy, but it's extremely difficult for me. To really listen, right? You hear people, but to listen, and it's not sometimes words, right? So cues. So the people who are around you sometimes may not say, well, I would like you to stop working now so that you can spend time with me. It is, so the new episode of Blackish is on, Mom, right? And so in the past, I might have been like, okay, that's great, and kept. So I'm trying to be, you know, more intentional. And with that, I'm finding more of a balance, because to Delivette's point, stress and fatigue can break us down, right? Everybody. And when you're actually doing something that you enjoy, because I enjoy working, right? Like I can now say that out loud. I felt like it was a 4-letter word in the past, because you have to sort of say, oh, this stuff. I like to work. I like looking at data. I like to work. And now I don't feel bad about it, right? Because I was able to use my skill set to achieve something really great. But I've also developed some health challenges in the context of COVID. And it was a reality check that even if you're doing something great, even if you enjoy it, even if you carve out a little time for everybody else, it still can negatively impact you. So I'm a work in progress around the work-life balance. So hopefully no one's at my job on this call, but I did take a nap in the middle of my workday today. So that's great. So just little, you know, baby steps, but it's hard, especially if you like what you do. You know, it's tough.
Yeah, it can become all consuming, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So Delivette, what do you like to do in your free time?
Work.
Is that why there's this long pause? Uh-oh. I think I see an intervention coming.
Judy's comments, so many of the comments Judy made resonate. You know, one, yes, I love what I do. You know, I'm thankful every day that I am in pursuit of purpose. You know, you know, we're not exactly where we want to be, but I feel comfortable with the path I'm on and figuring it out. And I've made peace with that. And so, you know, so in that, it's when I turn it off and I pay attention to my family, then I also practice presence with that as well. So I try to be wherever I need to be fully present. I also give up the idea that I'm a multitasker. I'm not. I tried for a long time, and I realized that it also came with a lot of shame and guilt, because then because we want to do everything exceptionally well, and then you just end up doing it kind of half. So I'm in the process and continue to really try to practice presence. And if I'm with this thing in the moment, then I just lock in on that and I do it to completion. And then when I'm with my family, I do it and I try to do that. So when it's dinner time, then I don't do work. I, you know, for that moment, actually shut it off and give family my undivided attention. And that helps with the guilt that comes with loving what you do and no one else around you understanding that deep love. Yeah, so I think that's how I cope with it. And I think also, forming a community, whether, I feel fortunate as a woman in science, to not be the first of many. As I mentioned, when I started this journey, I came in where, Judy was one of several faculty of color who were there and made the transition easy for me as a student, and gave me a voice, and it's one I never let go of. They were vocal and they were advocates, and they created a space where you were comfortable first in what because we are talking as professionals. So it's not just a feeling, it's first of all, like, I know what I know what I don't know, and I'm comfortable saying when I don't know something and I need to go figure it out, because that's also very important. And then also having people who, from a professional standpoint, you can go to with questions, and talk it through. And again, some of them are questions about how you navigate the field, and some of them are questions that are technical in nature, and you really want to spend the time talking it through. And it might involve a glass of wine or two, and sometimes more. Not to say we binge drink, but it does free up the thinking and produce a lot of creativity, and so those things happen, and I think they're really important for professional growth and for happiness.
Chibuzo, what do you do when you have a free moment?
So I think, I don't have children, and I'm not married. So I appreciate the challenges that Zach can, bring when it comes to self-care and free time, or the lack thereof. But I've really worked to kind of prioritize my free time, my self-care time, and kind of make those things as important as work. And so I know Delivette mentioned the importance of having, a network. I'm, very fortunate. I have a large family, although they're not in New York, but I have a large a group of friends who are like my family and who are very supportive. And so we do different things. I've recently become very outdoorsy. And so we go camping, we go hiking, right? We make those plans, they're on my calendar. And the same way a meeting is on my calendar, or the Zoom call is on my calendar, that trip is on my calendar. I am not available for anything else. And something that I like to do for me is I run quite a bit. And I've run a couple of New York City marathons and some half marathons, and so
Just a little running.
Just a little, couple marathons in this real time.
Couple New York marathons. Okay. I like how you just threw that in there. Did you think we were thinking? That was wonderful. Sorry to interrupt the train. I'm like, ooh.
Thought she was going to say a 5K.
And so that time, so that gives me an opportunity to set goals that are important for me, that are outside of work and outside of career goal, and also gives me that time on the run is like me, it's just me and the road and the weather. And without that, I don't really function so well. And honestly, I get my best ideas, my best creativity really is that time that I have on the run. So that's, and I just want to add one last thing that's also so important about this is listening to the work I do, the work Delivette does, the work Judy does, the work you do, Laura. It's, as scientists, as women, as Black women, we're often in spaces where it's overwhelmingly not women and not people of color. And the work that we're doing is, my work is a lot of focus on, disparity and racism and inequity. And these things, it is a profession, but we also have to realize that we're not brick walls, right? At least I'll speak for myself. There are days when these topics and thinking about these things really penetrate, and I start to internalize them. And so self-care is just so important for us because we have to be able to do this work and still be able to function and move through life and get our promotions or whatever it may be, right? So yeah, just self-care and work-life balance, those things are so important for many reasons.
Yeah, absolutely critical. You make such great points. So I'm going to go on to maybe come up with one of the last questions, and then I don't know, I'm having trouble seeing the chat, so maybe someone else can help me with the chat. But I'm going to ask this to Judy. I'm going to ask this to everybody. What keeps you up at night?
Oh, so many things. I think fundamentally, not being able to contribute in a meaningful way, right? I feel like I've done that partly now, but I have always been driven by I have something to offer the world, and not in an egotistical way, right? Like it's like I know that once I figure it out, like I have the ability to help people or help, affect something. And so I do worry sometimes about whether I'm fulfilling that, whether I will continue to fulfill that in the future, whether I'm, going in the right direction. We all, we do the work that we do because we enjoy it and, we're good at it. But we're professionals, right? So you have to think about your trajectory. I'm not thinking maybe 10 years. I mean, 10 years from now, I'm trying to retire, but, or sooner, but, you're thinking about what the next thing is. And, I struggle a little bit with, do I stay in this space? Because I am, I'm doing good. Whatever, right? Or is there more? Do I have the ability to contribute more? And it's not about money and title, like all of those things are important for sure. But I spend time worrying, am I doing enough? I guess is the better way to do it. And then the other half of it goes to the self-care piece, right? In my quest to keep doing more and keep, getting to whatever place I think I'm supposed to be in my head, what am I doing to those around me that I love? What am I doing to myself? Just trying to really, because I'm not good at it, not good at work-life balance, but I understand that it's important, right? And I try to, focus on that. So it's a little bit of a stressor, right? Because I now am in a place in my life and in my career where I know for sure I have something to contribute, right? Can't tell me anything. And it has nothing to do with COVID. It's just this, I've finally gotten there where, I know what I know. I also know what I can do. And I know what comes with that, right? And, do you take that and keep going? But there are sacrifices that come with that. So, I think it's a good thing, right? Because when you stop worrying about what's my next thing, or am I doing the best that I can do, whether it's in my personal life or professional life, if you stop worrying about any of that, then I think that's a problem. So I'm okay with the restless nights when I'm worrying about this, because it pushes me, and I'm somebody that needs that. I need the pressure. Like I function better with the pressure, which may be a bad thing, but that's where I think I do my best work.
it certainly has worked out well. We all can see that.
So far.
Delivette, what about you?
Yeah. No, in many ways, same here. I think, you know, I wouldn't say I have full clarity on exactly what is the, you know, how we would want to effect change. But I would maybe stepping back, it's sort of like, they're the big things you think you want to do. Like we're in this space that we know, and all experience is a meaningful space to try to do your best. And then there's all the minutia that needs to happen to make that big thing happen. And there are many, you know, so it's like, so I'm up at night because I'm like, oh my God, holy shit, you know, this protocol takes so much more to do, or, you know, and there's that, I mean, there's the little things that are not so little, but I mean, maybe to other people, and it often with the family, it's like, what are you doing? It's like paperwork, like you're just, you know, you're just on the computer all the time. Like, how does that happen? And then there's sort of bringing it in with all of the other soft things that are required to make it happen. I think one thing we didn't talk about in this space as people of color and how we navigate it, and we talked about having our voice, but sometimes speaking doesn't mean that you get heard, which is the other part. And so, you know, so there's sometimes frustration in trying to figure out, how can I be effective in the environment that I'm in? And the strategizing of how to do that. And that keeps, you know, so there's the technical side of, how do I do this? How do I do this best? How do I ask this question? Like, what are the details to actually get to an answer, and then get to an answer quickly, and get to an answer that's true, as close to true as possible. And then how do I do it in the context that I'm working, where often people of color aren't very well heard, aren't clearly heard, and you keep thinking, is it how I say it? Is it what I said? Is it the sequence of words? Is it because it's coming out of my black mouth? Like, what is the reason why it's not being heard? And that dialogue, you know, with yourself, with your friends and family and colleagues that are safe people to talk to about it, also is very consuming. You know, and I think, you know, and each time we make a transition into another field, and I think many of us have that element in common of, and I think it's also the nature of the world, like no one does anything for a lifetime anymore. So it's like, you know, we get the 7-year itch professionally. So it's like you've done something for a half a decade and you start thinking, you know, how do I create more chaos in my life? I need to do something new. And then you get to the new environment, and then you know, and there's a reset, and you have to figure that out. And that keeps you up at night, because now people have to know you again, trust that what you're saying makes sense, figure out how to talk to them and how they should hear you. So those things are keeping me up at night right now, trying to figure out how to get the work done, how to get it done correctly with good quality, and how to be heard.
Thank you. And then Chimbuzo, do you want to answer too, or?
Sure. So yeah, what keeps me up at night? I think, you know, I kind of have to echo what Judy and Delivette have said. Kind of the realities of for me, of getting my work done. And what I mean by that is, you know, in being a person of color, being a woman whose work focuses on advocating for people that look like you, and who are not as privileged as you as a result of, you know, systemic institutionalized racism and oppression, it's hard sometimes for me to get out of bed in the morning, because I ask myself, what am I actually doing? Am I actually doing anything at all? Right? You turn on the news, you open up the latest Lancet or JAMA, and we're still talking about inequities, not just HIV, we're talking COVID, which we all saw. We're talking, you know, pregnancy outcomes, police brutality, mental illness, the injustice of the criminal justice system. So I think sometimes it's hard when your profession is all of this and your life outside of your profession is also all of this. And for me, really, that's the biggest challenge, just kind of watching these things play out and wondering if, am I just doing a song and dance, or am I actually making any type of impact here? Am I just making a career out of talking about injustice, or am I actually impacting something in the world? So that's what keeps me up at night.
That would be a long night. Really long nights. Yikes. So there's a couple questions in the chat, which I'd like to get to. Jenna Hart says that she is a graduate student in biology and would like to ask, what is the one piece of advice that you would recommend for young professionals in the STEM/research career track? So anyone can answer that. I'm just going to kind of fly through some of these questions so that we can be sure to answer.
I mean, I can start. One of the advantages, I think, of these opportunities with Zooms and panels is I think it gives all of us a little bit more access to maybe people that we may not have access to. And so in recent years, one of the things that I've been driving home is mentorship and asking for help. And so, reach out to anybody, whether it's this panel or people that if you join another talk, if you have a specific question or guidance, look at what work they're doing and see if that resonates with you, and just see if you can have a conversation, because all that person could say is no, or they don't respond, and you've lost nothing. But if they do respond, then you have an opportunity, right? And you heard Delivette from the onset say the differences between most intelligent people is opportunity. And we don't do that enough. So I really encourage people. The mentorship piece is tough. People, struggle with it because you feel like you have to have this relationship. So now just ask a question, say, what would you recommend? They might give you sources. They might actually say, I'd love to mentor you. But if you don't ask, you won't find out. Because as you can see from this panel, there are many different ways to get to similar points. You just have to figure out which one is for you and which one you'll enjoy the most. And a lot of that is just asking people that are doing similar things.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add a little to that?
I mean, I concur 100%. And I think for me, in my experience kind of coming through this, that's one thing I wish I would have done more. And also not letting imposter syndrome get in the way for asking for help. Don't feel like because you're in a space where there are folks that don't look like you, that you should feel like you don't belong there, that you can't ask for help because it's going to make you appear as though you don't know what you're doing or that you don't belong there. Please don't let that get in the way. Ask for help and look for mentorship. Yeah.
Delivette, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, no, I think Chibuzo and Judy covered it really well in terms of the mentor model. I think is so important in finding a safe space. And I would say it's not mentor as a single person. It's mentors. Someone said it really well, which is, when you think of mentorship, you kind of think of people like a Mr. Potato Head. And as you interact with people, you take the best from each one to make yours, So you might take the nose, you might take Judy's nose and Laura's eyes to put it together, because those two enrich you in unique ways. And sometimes those two will disagree, and it helps you to sort of form your understanding and your opinion. And again, I think it's, and it's both, professionally and emotionally. As Chibuzo said, I think sometimes the imposter syndrome comes, as you go from one, again, we're in this fluid space, many of us professionally. No one is ever practicing a singular discipline, right? So everything is an intersection. And once you start intersecting a little bit more with another discipline, they start using different words and different jargon that you don't know. And then you have to ask yourself, like, who's dumb? First of all, who's dumb in the room? Is it me? Is it them? Is anyone? Is it everyone? And even that to figure out, and that takes time to figure out, how am I asking a question that doesn't reveal that I'm the dumb one, to be honest. So so it's the challenge with boldness. It's like, some, and I can't say that you just, you shed it. We don't. Whenever I'm in a new room, I do a lot more listening than I do talking at the outset, and to understand the landscape. And but now we have our devices, and and I ask questions. Like, if I see things, I will text a Judy, and I'd be like, yeah, these people are saying this. Is this true? What is this story? What's going on? So, and that's where, again, seeking people out where you have a common and sincere interest, in a topic area, in a topical area, in something of common interest, really helps, because I would say most times that I've cold called someone because I was sincerely interested in the work that they were doing. Not necessarily, I mean, you want an opportunity as a young professional, you may be looking for a job, but if you're sincerely interested in, like, Judy, I read this article, something piqued my interest, something came up, I have a question, or I'm thinking about this thing for my own work that I'm doing, and I'm really sincerely trying to understand, that earnestness comes across. And people who are true to their discipline, you recognize it in other people, and that's a very sticky quality. It's probably the way many of us have formed our mentors. Like, some people are assigned to mentor you, and then some people you're adopted, and those you take with you for your life, in your life journey. So I would say, as you're discovering, talk to people about the things you're trying to discover as a professional.
Also, I think that, just asking questions sometimes is enough. You don't necessarily have to look for a life mentor.
Yeah.
You can get small bits of information from people. And I think sometimes people either feel guilty or, they feel uncomfortable because they know you're busy. Oh, I know you're busy. And, but I think that what happens is that you then lose the opportunity to actually learn something, even if it is, 5 minutes on the elevator or, in passing. Many times I think people are much more willing and interested in those quick mentoring opportunities than sort of sometimes the mentees even recognize. And I think that when you sort of label it with mentor, it takes on kind of this thing that becomes very big. And sometimes even I shy away from it. But if you just, what's your opinion? What are your thoughts? Just like what happens on these Zoom calls, I think is really helpful. And here's a nice question. There's actually two questions here. So one is, one of our members, NYR members, has an interest in pursuing a PhD or a doctor. PhD or -PH. Is it too late to begin a program in your early 30s?
Not at all.
Not at all. Yeah. Really never too late, is it?
No, it's never too late.
Right. Yeah. And then the next one is, how have you dealt with imposter syndrome? This is a great question.
I'm still dealing with it, to be honest. I mean, if I'm just going to be transparent, I think you can feel the imposter syndrome. Doesn't mean you have to exist or be, have that define the way that you carry yourself and behave. For me, I think Delivette alluded to this. You kind of move into different spaces in the work that we do, and you're not always sure that you really understand what's going on, and maybe you do, maybe you don't. And so you at times can have this feeling of I don't belong here, but something that I've been told coming up from different mentors is, it's normal to have feelings, and you should have feelings, feel them, right? The difference is how you behave and how you kind of move forward, right? So some can't allow that to kind of dictate the way that you operate. And I think what's helpful for that are good mentors, are a good support network. My older sister, who's also a physician scientist at a different institution, is a huge help for me when I feel the imposter syndrome creeping in. So yeah, I think it's something that, at least for me, that comes and goes. It doesn't completely.
Judy?
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, it's tough. And I guess what I have learned a little bit is it's okay not to know all the answers. And I never want to be the smartest person in the room, right? Because if I'm the smartest person in the room, then there's no opportunity for me to learn anything. And so what I tend to do now is, if I feel like I'm a little bit out of my depth, is sort of regroup and say, well, I know a lot about, because usually you're in the room because you are an expert in a particular piece of whatever it is that's going on, right? And no one really can take away your experience and your expertise and the work that you've done to get there. And so I just try to re-anchor, right? Because particularly with us, where it's usually just one of us in the room, we're there for a very particular reason. And so even if you don't know anything about anything else, you know what you know, and it's relevant to the conversation. And what I have found is that, because I work in an environment where people talk a lot all the time, repeat themselves all the time, that, even after three people just said the same thing, right? It's the culture. But what I have found is it's better to say something impactful, one thing. Mm-hmm. People then start listening to you a little bit more intently because they know that when you open your mouth that you have something to say that's of value. And not worrying about always having to say something gives you time to think, gives you time to listen. Well, what are they talking about? I don't really know. But how does that relate to what I know about? And bring it back to your level of expertise, or ask a question in a way that suggests that, well, in my previous role or whatever, blah, blah, blah. How does that, so there are techniques that work really well. And I think when you're feeling that way, you have to I try to be more strategic, right? About how I communicate in that environment. You'll see the reactions, right? You see how people then go, oh. And a lot of times they don't know the answer either, because that's the okie doke, right? Like, that's the thing. People, you think everybody else knows the answer. A lot of times, most people don't. There may be somebody that can, and you're actually, being brave by sort of being a little bit vulnerable. So I would say switch off the I'm an imposter. You're at the table. There's nothing fake about you, right? It's just us getting in our heads. So that's how I deal with that.
That's awesome. There is another question in the chat. What steps should a high school student, take to begin on the STEM research career track? This is a good step one, the fact that you're asking.
I mean, high school is a long way away for me, but I think, there are a lot of STEM programs. There are a lot of, summers coming up. I don't really know what things are going to look like still in COVID, but I would say try to find, there's actually a lot of online stuff now that's free because it can be by Zoom as opposed to being in person. I think there's a little bit more opportunity. So literally just signing up for STEM camps, STEM educational stuff, and then see what you like about it. STEM is quite broad, right? Mm-hmm. and there are many things that you could do to it. Like people wouldn't necessarily think of, I guess, epidemiology as STEM, but it is. So there are data elements, there's robotics, there's, the more traditional sciences, but there's a lot of different things. And so in high school, I think this is great to sort of figure out, not that you just like STEM, but what exactly do you like? Do you like the mechanics of it? Do you like the math part? Do you like the an analytical? There's so many different things. So just find what you can get. And if you're running up against obstacles, you're a high school student, I'm thinking, because Pfizer has internships and programs. I just don't remember if they're high school, but they're different organizations that also will place you in different programs. So I would say do your research. If you get stuck, email the person. You'd be surprised what people do, right? And I'm just using Pfizer as an example because that's where I work, or Columbia. They'll say, oh, I see somebody on this list on the website that went to Columbia. Well, I remember Delivette, that, Dr. Delivette was at Columbia. Well, email her or email that contact and say, oh, I saw you on blah, blah, blah. Do you know it? Just be a little bit proactive. Right. And you'll get there. But just have fun. Just figure out what you like about it and figure out that you really like it. Because sometimes people say, I want to do STEM, and then they start doing it and they're like, I don't like this. So that's important to know as well, because you don't want to go down a path and realize you hate it. So good luck. I'm excited. High school.
You're on mute, Laura.
You mentioned sort of STEM is really broad. And I think that is one of the appealing things about STEM, right? And no research project got done just with the investigator. There was, the person who helped you recruit the patients, communicate the science, the coordinator who, so there's just like all these other pieces that I think sometimes when you're a high school student, I certainly remember this, I only knew doctor because that's what I saw on television. I didn't understand all the other people that actually make the doctor be able to do their job. And so that's something that, some of these programs I think are really quite good related to health and science and biomedical science, et cetera. So I put a program in the chat that I've been a mentor for probably the last 20 years, which is just a really cool program that's at Harvard Medical School. But I know that Cornell has a STEM program as well for high school students and college students. And there is a lot of stuff that's online now because of COVID, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That may just improve your access, actually. So I would look into that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So you can also look up National Society of Black Engineers, which doesn't mean you have to be an engineer, but they actually have a lot of STEM programs. And so if you start there, you can go in the region and then go from there. So start maybe with some of these, big schools or big, organizations, and then it'll branch off and you'll get a lot of things. And again, there's a lot of stuff that's actually free right now. Like your parents may have to sign you up, but it's not necessarily like a fee or anything. So lots of opportunity.
Yeah. And I would add, another, in my prior life, because I was with the federal government, I think people don't think about the federal government as a place that you can do STEM. And they also have summer internship programs as well. Like almost all of the departments would have, ag, which, talk about the range of things you can do. I think we often don't even think about agriculture as a space. And maybe if you want to think about something that's outdoor and you can probably shop in person if you dare to, there are some of those opportunities that are there as well. And, I presume if the person's here, they're interested in health, but there are intersections with many other fields. So you can look at the USA.gov website for summer internships as well. And there are many different departments like USDA, Census, Commerce that also present opportunities.
Excellent. So I think we have gone through most of the things in the chat, and it's been a wonderful evening getting to know you. And I know that many people on this call have, I can tell, lots of interest and chatter in the chat function. I think that should I turn this over now to Jay to wrap us up, or
Sure,
is that fair?
That
Okay.
is totally fair, ladies, totally fair. I feel like I was sitting in a room with girlfriends, hearing amazing stories of experience, leadership, contribution, just amazing, amazing information for our members, our early careers, and also our high school student. Amazing, just a wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you, ladies, so much. I personally enjoyed this very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Laura. You did an amazing job as well. I'm going to close this evening, but I do see 3 more questions. Actually, I see 1 more question. Do you ladies feel okay to answering just 1 more question? What do you all think of practice department administrators can do to encourage or support women in research? Have a seat at the table.
I mean, I'll tell you what has been helpful for me in general as a woman, and also in work. One of the biggest things is just having people think about you when you're not there.
Right.
Right. So some people would say it's a sponsor, some people it's whatever. First of all, I think as women, we should just encourage each other. Little things like, hey girl, how you doing? Everything good? We don't have to have a therapy session. Are you good?
Right.
Great.
Right.
But if you're an administrator in a room and there's something that's needed, there's an expert that's required, there's an opportunity, just make sure, what about this person?
Right.
Right. And that's it. You'd be surprised, like, because once you start putting that person's name for it, then they become part of who we think about. Well, what about so-and-so? And it's not a lot of effort, but a lot of opportunities, believe it or not, don't come because if we're not there, people don't think about us. Exactly. And it happens to me all the time. And so just being mindful of, when it's John or David, to say it's Chibuzu or Delivette or Laura, put that name forth, and then they have to come up with a reason as to why not.
Gotcha.
Because the person you're talking about is clearly credentialed enough to be the pick, but she can't be picked if nobody mentioned her. So all of us just being mindful, but honestly, sometimes just somebody sending me an email or note to say, I saw you on this, or I heard you on that, or I saw you in that meeting. Hey girl, that's it. I say, it's really something quite small.
It gives that feeling of inclusion, right? Like you're heard.
And support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do anybody else want to contribute, or we're good?
I mean, I concur. I'll just say briefly, 100%. It's about creating opportunities for each other. And if we're not the ones doing it, right, we can't expect anyone else to.
That's right.
Exactly. Again, amazing. I love your candor, your transparency, the way you express yourselves over the obstacles and challenges you faced. The inspiration is amazing as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you everyone else for actually attending and participating. We have another program, if you like this one, coming up April the 27th. It is going to be another NAHSE event, Virtual Physician Roundtable, Healthcare Equity. We're doing something for National Minority Health Awareness Month for next month. So if you would like to attend, please go to our website to check it out. And that is it. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Have a wonderful night. If you guys have any questions, we have New York Regional, NAHSE @gmail.com if you have any questions. So please feel free to also email us if you have any questions that I'm sure our lovely panelists and our moderator would love to actually support and answer. So thank you so much.
Good night.
Have a great night.